Some of you may know that Jay Wang is one of our illustrious alumni, and we have kept in touch since he left Iowa. And when our exhibit was planned, I also was thinking about where it was going to go next, and it seemed very appropriate for it to go to USC. I believe USC has had the largest number of Chinese students for the longest time, although that's no longer a rarity. We have 4,000 at our campus. And one of the objectives of this exhibit is to bring the work of a noted Chinese photographer to young Chinese, as well as to new audiences in the United States. And so I think it's a very fitting place to continue that effort. Wang Wenlan and I were both on the original staff of China Daily. He actually started a bit earlier than I did when the paper was putting out trial issues from 1980 to mid-81. And then I joined in 81. I already had been in Beijing for 2 years teaching as what they called a polisher. I was a copy editor, a rewrite person, and I also wrote a lot of features. It was a small, very feisty staff, a really fun place. At first, Wang Wenlan was the only photographer. He was the first. He kind of stumbled into the job accidentally because he happened to be in the right place at the right time when China Daily editors were looking for someone. And he was soon joined by a couple of other young photographers, and he became the photo chief. He and I were born the same year, 1953, so we were both, 28 then or something. So he was quite young. He'd been a photographer in the Army. He's a tall, rangy guy, which is good for a photographer. My dad was a tall, rangy guy, because you can see over people. He really was one of the pioneers of contemporary Chinese news and documentary photography. Certainly not the only one, but one of the most important ones, and particularly important because he worked at China Daily. China Daily's first editorial group consisted largely of older men and women, many of whom had been sidelined during the Cultural Revolution because they had Western-inflected backgrounds. Some had even been in prison as rightists in the late 50s. Quite a few had gone to missionary schools before 1949. A number had studied in the United States. And so they were very open-minded people. And the first managing editor in particular, who had studied at Missouri, had tremendous affection for photography. And he said, China Daily is going to do photography differently. We're not going to have little postage stamps or little cubes of bean curd-sized pictures. We're not going to have just officials lined up. We're going to get people to take pictures of daily life, things that are unstaged, no more socialist realism. And because Wang Wenlan had a terrific eye, and because he had the license to go around and shoot spontaneously, and because his work was played up large, and he was constantly reinforced and encouraged, he really was able to accomplish a great deal. So he did both photography of news events and a lot of just personal work of daily life and street life. And so this exhibit comes from this, almost 4-decade body of work. It includes some of his favorites, it includes some of my favorites, and because I have known him for so long, we had a basis of trust to, put this together in a way that would please everybody. At Iowa, we also were able to bring him to campus, which was a great deal of fun, and we did a big day-long symposium on global photojournalism that was quite engrossing. And we had the exhibit up for 6 weeks, and it got, you know, a lot of great attention. It was in a lovely space. I kind of wished it could stay forever, but nothing can stay forever. And to me, Wang Wenlan's pictures remind me somewhat of my father's approach to photography. My father was a freelance photographer, but worked a great deal for Life magazine from the 50s through the death of Life in the early 70s, and other picture magazines. And he was a very kind of straight shooter, and looked for, he photographed lots of celebrities and politicians and movie stars and this and that for Life, because that was what he was assigned. But he most loved to photograph ordinary people and ordinary life, and tried to show the kind of dignity and struggles and triumphs of ordinary people. And Wang Wenlan works very much in that vein. I mean, he's photographed Deng Xiaoping, he's photographed all the bigwigs, he has full access to everything, but he's not that interested in those people. He's interested in life in the streets. He's concerned about his country and its development, and he shows unpleasant things as well as happy things, but he's not gloomy, he's not dark, he's not brooding. He's got an optimistic, realistic, I think, but optimistic lens on the world. And so I just love his photography. I'm a huge admirer, and he gave us just kind of carte blanche to choose the selection we thought would work well. He and his assistant in the past had worked on pairing pictures of 80s and 90s with New Millennium mostly. So he already had some of those pairs, but we chose some additional ones, and they're a lot of fun, and they're full of whimsy, and they really speak to people who have either grown up in China or visited China. So native Chinese tourists really appreciate them. They'll say, I've seen that, I remember that. But also they give people who don't have experience in China a sense of real life. And so I'm just pleased as can be that they're there, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart.